thought we all drifted apart in adulthood, but then I saw their vacation photos. This probably sounds childish, but for so long we did absolutely everything together. 5 of us are going on a trip, but we decided not to invite one person in the group. How do we explain the reason why they weren't invited without sounding judgmental about their mental health? My friends and I are currently on a trip, and one of them can't stop texting her boyfriend. I feel kind of jealous that she wants to talk to him more than she wants to be here with us. Tell me, Hayes, how can I be a better friend here? Hello and welcome back to the Hello Hayes podcast. Today we're talking about travel and friendship. Travel and friendship. Complicated. There is such thing as a travel friend, maybe a travel bestie. Should travel bestie be included in the 6 besties theory? I actually think that maybe we just need like a 7th bestie that we all have the ability to, call upon when we need. It could be the travel bestie. It could be the doctor, the medical emergency bestie. Though I think that any of these could fall into other categories. Like sometimes your travel bestie might be good time bestie, right? You might want to travel with someone who is like that. Or maybe you want to only travel with someone who's like your seasonal bestie and you write together. So you want to go somewhere where you can sit in a cabin and write. Does anyone actually do that? Anyway, traveling is a complicated topic with friends. Not that people's personalities change when they travel, but a new side of personality and preferences does come out. And if you've never done it with someone before, there is a little bit of a kind of testing period. And I think it can be hard. It can be friendship making, certainly. Like I know that some people have made great friends when they've gone on people's bachelorettes or grooms. What's the version? Bachelor party? Groom's party. I know people have made great friends that way. And I also know that sometimes friendships fall apart after traveling together because something went wrong and no one talked about it, or we did talk about it, but it blew up. And to travel with someone does mean to go into it with like an open heart and recognizing that you might not be on the same page all the time, but in making the decision to travel together, you and I'm going to see the best in you. I'm going to give the generous read here. And if everybody in the group can do that, I think traveling with friends is one of the greatest things ever. I haven't done it in a while. I haven't really traveled in a very long time. I do a bunch of travel going back to Boston and New York to visit family, which I guess literally is travel, but haven't done the kind of, mind expanding awe type of travel, which I would like to do more of. I say all the time that I want to travel more, and travel so easily becomes the thing that like falls to the wayside that you always make excuses for. I find that I always make excuses for why I can't travel, why I don't travel. Many of them are financial, which is real, though we could save, we could choose to spend on that instead of on other things. I do have some trips. Brian and I, it's our 10-year anniversary coming up, so we will be going to Hawaii in end of September, early October. We're doing a week in Kauai, but he's not a friend. He's a husband and a friend. But I haven't done a friend's trip in a while, and in thinking about this, it's made me kind of reflect on that. Why I haven't done a friend's trip, what that means about how I'm choosing to spend my time, how I'd like to spend my time moving forward. Something to think about. And when I think about it, I try to also be kind of generous with myself. I've had a lot going on, so it makes sense, and I understand that why I haven't been able to prioritize that. And I've also seen how time just continues to go by. And if it's important to me, I have to make time for it. You got to make time for the stuff that's important to you. So 2025, I'd love to do a trip with a friend or some friends. I mostly have individual friendships at this point in life, though I do have a couple of small group friendships from like high school OG besties and college besties who are, I wouldn't call them college besties, but you know what I'm saying. Life's just going to continue to go by, and I want to prioritize trips with friends and not just dinners and catch-ups and stuff like that, because I think that the quality time of travel can be really important. Anyway, what we're talking about today in these letters is sort of the underbelly of travel with friends, the tough stuff that comes up. We've got one letter where someone has seen that their OG besties have traveled without them and is dealing with the pain and grief of kind of reckoning with what that means. We have another letter from someone who is planning a trip with friends but has decided not to include somebody else and asks me, how do we communicate with that friend why they weren't included without jeopardizing our friendship? And we have a third letter from someone who is traveling right now with some friends, and one of the girls on the trip won't stop texting her boyfriend. What do we do about that? Do you say anything? How do you say something without being without coming across as super intense? We know no one likes being told to get off their phone, or I don't like being told to get off my phone. I'll raise my hand and say that. Always hard for me to hear that. Brian's really the only one who says it to me because he's the only person I'm bad at it with. I'm pretty good at being off my phone with friends and family, but with Brian, because we live together, it makes sense. Here I go, rationalizing it. But when he tells me to, be more present, to get off my phone or pay attention, are you here, Hayes? Are you with me? That's when I can get annoyed, and it's something I'm working on. So, without further ado, let's begin. Hello, Hayes. I have a group of friends that I've been tight with since grade school. We're in our late 20s now and all live in different places. We meet up on rare occasions and make a point to check in with each other every now and then. On some level, of course, I've been aware that we've drifted and made other friends, but they've still always felt like family to me. I would drop everything to help any one of them without a second thought. Here's the thing. Recently, I found out via social media that several of the group went on a trip together, and only a few of us were left out. A few of us occasionally would hang out randomly if we were in the same city or maybe one-on-one, but something like this has never happened before. I doubt I would have been able to go on something like this, but realizing that I wasn't invited really stings. We have a group chat, and I suppose I was naive in believing that all or most of our contact was happening in there. I never considered that some of the group may be getting closer and making other plans while a few of us drifted apart. I'm not sure why this hurts so much. I never would have suggested taking a trip with them. I don't keep extremely in touch besides the occasional check-in, and yet I can't help but feel devastated. I feel like something has died that I'm grieving, even though it's been a long time since we were that original close-knit group. This probably sounds childish, but we really did do everything together for a long time. Every trip or get-together or birthday, so it completely caught me off guard to see just some of us hanging out without the others. Am I wrong to feel this way? I feel too awkward now to even text or check in. I wouldn't say anything about the trip, but I would be thinking about what I did wrong to get left out, and if they were going to talk about whatever I said privately amongst themselves. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Yours, Lonely. So, okay, number one, it's definitely not wrong to feel this way. It's definitely not wrong to have a reaction when you realize that while you've drifted apart, others have drifted closer. As you said, I think that line in your letter really, really encapsulated what this feeling is. And let's try not to, all of us, let's try not to label our emotions. Let's try not to assign them like any morals, our feelings, right? Feelings don't have morals. Feelings are not good or bad. They're just information and sometimes noise. And right now, you're feeling grief. You called that out yourself. You're feeling grief, and I completely understand why you are. I've been in a similar situation myself. I had deja vu while reading this letter, though it actually wasn't deja vu. I've never experienced deja vu. Every time Brian has deja vu, I'm like, what did it feel like? He's like, it's deja vu. Like, I don't know how to describe this to you. It's deja vu. That's all I can say. And nothing's worse than someone explaining a concept by using the same word. But reading your letter, I was transported to a very specific moment in time. I could remember exactly where I was on my couch in my first apartment with Brian on Houston Street in New York City when I saw that a bunch of my high school friends had gone on a trip together to one of the girls' summer houses, and I wasn't invited. But the reality is that I shouldn't have been invited because we weren't friends anymore. I hadn't been a part of that group in 6 years. There's no reason why I should have been invited. And yet I still felt pain similar to if I hadn't been invited when we were all still friends. So in remembering this, I went into my Google Docs because that is where I actually searched through a bunch of my journals, couldn't find it, and then I remembered I had been typing. I typed out this essay, and I'm going to read you what I wrote. I cannot call it an essay. It's quite literally 2 paragraphs, and then I gave up. That was very reflective of the type of writing I was doing back in 2017. It was when I was trying, I sort of knew I was a writer, but I was struggling with accepting that. I was struggling with actually putting in the work that's required to actually be a writer instead of just thinking of yourself as one. So a lot of my quote essays were 2 paragraphs and some notes. Okay, I'll read to you now. I hadn't thought about my high school friends until I saw they were hanging out without me. I guess it shouldn't come as a surprise. They all live where I grew up in Boston and I live in New York City. But it stung when I saw on Instagram that they forgot to invite me on their girls' trip in Rhode Island. It's clear that I did this to myself, but does that mean I don't have a right to feel upset? I'd argue that I might not have the right to feel angry at anyone else, but I do have the right, or perhaps even the moral obligation, to explore these feelings in myself so that I have a say in whether or not it happens again. I mean, I feel like some of the quotes in those two paragraphs that I wrote are like identical to what you wrote in your letter. It stings. It stung. I remember seeing the pictures and feeling like, what is it about me that I am not there? What is it about me that I was unable? I think really what hurt for me the most that I can, oh gosh, it feels really vulnerable to say this. What hurt the most was that it triggered something in me that was like, what is it about me that I can't keep friends? That isn't even true. It is true that I have always kind of felt out of place in large group female friendships. I've always struggled in that context. But I'm like, what is it about me that I couldn't stay in touch with everybody? What is it about me that no one wanted to be my friend? And that initial kind of self-deprecating, I don't know if self-deprecating is actually the right word, but that initial like self-hating is probably more what it's like. That initial self-hating feeling really made me feel bad. And it evoked like years and years and years of kind of cruelty that I have felt about myself and criticism that I felt about myself about how I show up in large friendships. But I had like reading those notes from myself, what stands out to me is that I wanted to explore these feelings so that I have a say in whether or not it happens again. And I think I want to encourage you to do that too, and I think you are starting to do that. When we have a feeling, when we realize we've been left out, when we have this gut feeling, which again, the gut feeling you had is A-okay, you have to decide, do I want to do anything about this? Does this sad feeling I'm having mean that I actually want to be really close with all of them again? That I want to put in that effort? That I want to change? Or is this just a feeling that comes with growing up and making new friends and making different life choices? For me, I realized this is just part of growing up and choosing the life I'm living. I chose my life in New York. I chose to only invest in a few of those friendships. A few of my high school friends and I are still close, and I would, like you said, do anything for, even if we're not talking all of the time. They all live together, though. They all live in the same place, and it's been hard. There have been moments where it's been hard for me to remember and to check myself that I have chosen my life. I chose my life in New York. I've chosen my life here in California, and there are consequences to that. And there are also ways where relationships can, evolve and grow into the reality that you're in. But I have to take ownership of that, and you have to take ownership of that. And if back then, when I saw those pictures of everybody on Instagram in Rhode Island, if I had said, you know what, this is a wake-up call for me that I actually want to be. I want to be included on that type of trip. I want to be friends with my high school friends in that way, the way they all are still close. And what do I have to do to make that happen? Well, I have to reach out to people. I have to check in more. I have to do the thing that friends do when they want to be included in that way. But I didn't want to do that. And it was kind of I went through all the waves of feeling there. I went through the shock. I think I was being sarcastic when I said that they forgot to invite me. Obviously, they didn't forget to invite me. I was being silly. But I went through kind of that shock and surprise, to the grief, to the acceptance. And I think since then, since I've had that moment, the feeling has become much more tolerable and less frequent. I guess it is when something like this happens to you, when you suddenly feel left out from something, though you as the person being left out also have recognition that you do get kind of why you weren't invited, which I think you do. You're saying there's a mix in this letter. There's a mix here where you're recognizing that you've been kind of living in la la land, assuming that no one's been continuing their friendships and that you haven't put in effort yourself. It'd be different if you were like, Hayes, we're all 6 best friends. We talk all of the time. We talk about traveling together. I've said I want to travel with them and they went on a trip and only didn't invite me. That would be a different scenario. Because you have that recognition, you have to ask yourself, do you want to be friends with them? And that's a really interesting and powerful place to sit, I think. Because you can choose now. You have agency and you can choose whether you want to do things differently. And some people might say, well, why don't you just ask them why you weren't invited? I think you know why you weren't invited. You weren't invited because you aren't putting an effort to these friendships, and you haven't in years. That's why. I think they're like, if I have awareness in a situation to recognize my role in something, aka I'm not friends with these people and I would not go on a trip with them, I probably wouldn't go if they asked, and I wouldn't suggest it, then I don't need to have a conversation with them asking them to explain that to me. Like, I'm a big girl and I can do that on my own. However, if I am friends with one of them, if I do have a closer relationship with one person who went on the trip, I might talk about some of the feelings that came up for me without being accusatory. Like, I might say, when I saw that you all went on that trip, it was kind of a moment for me to realize how much things have changed, and that felt kind of hard. I think that's okay to start a conversation like that, but it's not accusatory. It's like, it's coming from a place of sharing and connecting rather than being like, it hurt my feelings when you left me out from the trip. That's different. That's more accusatory, and it's since the reality is that you have drifted, if you approach the conversation like that, it would make you seem like you have no self-awareness, and you do. You've got lots of self-awareness. So if you decide to address this with a friend, bring that self-awareness to the table. The last thing you said, though, is like you feel too awkward to text and check in. They're going to talk about you privately. What they do or don't do is none of your business, you know? What people are going to say about you is none of your business. I don't think you need to feel that way. If you do, you do, and maybe you feel more comfortable reaching out to people one-on-one. Like, if you're feeling nervous about getting active in the group chat, maybe you just start by reaching out to people one-on-one is what I'm trying to say. But also, part of putting yourself out there and reinvesting in friendships does mean sitting with your discomfort for a minute. And people might say, hey, Lonely hasn't talked to us in a while, and now she is. I wonder why. And then you push through that. That's sort of your responsibility when you raise your hand and say, I want to be more present in these relationships. Hopefully then people will start to respond to you and you won't be left out in the dark. But you might be left out in the dark. It's sort of a risk you have to take when you have withdrawn from friendships and then you want to put more in. But I think it's a risk that's worth it. It's a risk that's worth it if you decide. But you might decide, you know what? I actually am comfortable with where things are. I'm happy with the relationships in my life. And this was like a milestone in adulthood. This was a reality that was sort of painful for me to stomach, but I stomached it, and I am stronger now since. And I get to decide with my friendships moving forward, with these ones, and with new friendships I make, I get to decide how I want to show up with them. Hello, Hayes. I used to be in a friend group 5 years ago, including my friend Mac. The group has gotten together a couple of times since, but we have not actively planned a trip to visit as a group, nor have we kept in touch in a big group chat. 5 of us are going on a trip abroad, and we're not inviting Mac. We thought about the consequences of only inviting some people before planning, and ultimately decided that the people here had the same values for the trip and the benefit of convenient scheduling. We know that Mac will be hurt by this decision, because they are still pretty close with 3 people in the group. We can't control how they react, but we want to let Mac know in advance so that they're not blindsided and also understand why they weren't included in this plan. For further context, Mac struggles with anxiety and over the years has canceled plans last minute. They also get overwhelmed in new or crowded environments. We want to be as truthful with Mac when explaining reasoning, but don't want to make them feel bad about their mental health struggles. There's other reasons, such as location convenience and preferred vacation activities, that also led to this decision. Ideally, we want to keep our friendships with this person while asserting the boundary that they may not be the best person to travel with at this point. Do we talk to Mac individually? Only the people closest talk with them first? How do we explain the main reason without sounding judgmental of how they cope with their mental health? Yours, group trip. I think it's hard not to sound judgmental when you are in fact being judgmental. It's okay not to be friends with Mac anymore, and it's even okay, though hard, for Mac's mental health to be a contributing factor to why your friendship has drifted. It is not, however, it's not being a good friend, though, to strip Mac of their agency and to make a decision for them without running it by them. That's not nice. It's not being a good friend, and I'm not going to tell you otherwise. I think there's a lot we can talk about here because I do recognize that this is complicated. But what you've done is you've made a decision, and I think you might know deep down somewhere that what you've done isn't nice. It's not being a good friend, or you wouldn't have asked me. Though I do think you're asking me because you're looking for me to tell you that it's okay. And this doesn't strike me as okay. This doesn't strike me as something a friend does to another friend. In making a decision without talking to Mac about it and saying that we're not inviting Mac because of the way Mac deals with their anxiety and because of the things that have happened in the past, you've effectively taken away Mac's ability to make a brave choice, to make decisions for themselves, to show how they've grown. You've assumed they haven't grown at all over the years when people do grow, and you're pretending that it's about caring about them and love, when really it's about selfishness. And I know that's hard to hear. I have acted that way too. I do act that way too. How often do all of us think we're doing something out of love, or we tell ourselves that we're doing it out of love and to protect them, when really we're just trying to protect ourselves? I'm thinking about how I would feel and have felt when I have struggled with my mental health, when I've been in a dark place, if friends said, we know you're going through a hard time, so we just didn't invite you. We know that you've been kind of exhausted recently, so we assumed that you wouldn't want to come. What that really means is they assumed that I would be a damper on their trip, or they knew I would be a damper on their trip and they didn't want to include me. And that would be really, really, really hurtful. It has been really, really hurtful. The dynamics of this friendship, though, are really important context here. Like, the big question is, what is this friendship actually like? You've described it. The reason I don't get I don't feel like I have a fully honest verdict from your letter is because you've both tried to show that that you are not close with Mac anymore, though you also all feel the need to say something to Mac, which to me is an indicator that this isn't right. You said that Mac will be blindsided. Will Mac be blindsided in a way that I was blindsided in the previous letter we talked about when I saw that my high school friends were in Rhode Island without me? Will Mac be blindsided in a way that our first letter writer was blindsided when they saw that some of their friends had traveled? And by that I mean initially blindsided, but then falling into deep recognition and understanding of the situation and how things have changed? Or will they be blindsided because you guys are all very much a friend group, and it is weird that you didn't tell Mac about this? It's weird that you didn't talk about Mac, that you didn't talk about the trip with Mac beforehand. That matters. I do firmly believe that you do not have to travel with every single one of your friends. I do believe that even in a larger friend group, it's okay to have individual friendships, but there is more of a responsibility when you are in a large friend group. You do have a greater responsibility if you choose to engage in that type of friendship, to be considerate of others. And if you are unable to do that, if you're unable to function in that way, in that kind of selfless way on behalf of the whole group, maybe you're not actually as good at being in a large friend group as you think you are. We're all allowed to have individual friendships within groups. However, too many people use that as an excuse to be exclusive. It's not an excuse. When you're planning a trip or when you're doing anything with some friends, most people do not ask themselves, is this the time when I should be including everyone, even if I have some doubts? Or is this the time when it's appropriate to only do something with a few people, even if it means that someone's feelings might be hurt? Even that question alone, if you are in a large friend group, you need to be asking yourself that and really kind of questioning it, interrogating your decision making to make sure that you're doing something you can kind of stand behind. I don't think there's any way for you to say, hey, Mac, we talked about this as a group and we think that your anxiety can be a little much sometimes. And because of that, we decided that, we didn't want to invite you on this. And you don't like to do the same types of activities as us. So we decided that this wasn't the kind of trip you'd want to come on. No, there's no way to say that. And I would never recommend saying that. What I might recommend before you make the decision, you should never be making a decision on behalf of someone else. Before you make the decision, you could say, Mac, Sarah and I have been talking about doing a trip to Argentina. We think it would be really fun to hike and go to a concert and do this type of thing. Is that something that you'd be interested in? And open the conversation up that way. Give them the chance to advocate for themselves. Give them the benefit of the doubt that they'll be able to say, thank you for inviting me. That trip doesn't sound like something I can do right now. Especially if you're all getting older. if you're getting older, give Mac the chance to show that Mac understands themselves better now and is able to make decisions that are better for their health. I don't think it's okay to take a friend's choice away from them based on behaviors they showed years ago. Yeah, I'm reading back the letter now. We know that Mac will be hurt by this decision because they're still pretty close with 3 people in this travel group. There's really no way for you to get out of, if you've already done this, if you've already made this choice, you need to, if I were you, I would own up to the fact that you did something hurtful, and I'd probably apologize. This to me could be apology territory. Mac is close with everyone. If you said 3 people in the group, there's 5 of you traveling, you're one of them. Look, it is complicated, and I also empathize with, look, let me throw it out there. Maybe Mac has no self-awareness. Maybe Mac is not aware of the way their behavior, or not their behavior, but the way that their anxiety and whatnot impacts others. Maybe they have never taken accountability or responsibility for their health. Those are all things that would make it hard to travel with someone, and maybe over time make you feel less kind of sensitive and empathetic towards their struggle. But I think that to have that blow up around the trip is still not the way to go. It's still not the way to go. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to keep a friendship while, asserting this boundary. This isn't a boundary. Like, I'm not going to invite you on our trips with all of our friends because of your anxiety and because of the activities you like to do. That's not a boundary, man. I think this is like weaponizing the term boundary. I don't think boundaries are what we're talking about here. If I understand boundaries correctly, the boundary is not that you can't come with me. The boundary is I'm not going to travel with them. Now, it would be still wrong to assert your boundary and say, let me plan a trip with all of our friends. But because I have a boundary of not traveling with Mac's not going to be invited. Maybe then, if that is your boundary, that you don't want to travel with Mac, and you're part of this friend group, again, you take some responsibility of what that means. You have some responsibility to this group. It isn't nice. Maybe that means then, per your boundary, that you do one-on-one trips or groups of 3 or things that aren't so obviously exclusive. This is a complicated one. This is a really, really complicated one. Because also though, like if no one's friends with Mac, and this isn't a big deal. Mac's feelings still might be hurt in the way that my feelings were hurt and the first letter writer's feelings were hurt, but it's part of life. That it does not sound to me though, based on this letter, that that's what the situation is. So I don't think you're a bad person. Let me say that, because I feel like I've been coming down really hard. But I did choose this letter. I did choose this one because I think so many of us, myself included, can fall into the trap of making excuses for our own bad behavior and behavior that isn't being a good friend. And I want to hold myself more accountable, and I want to hold you accountable. And anybody listening, that, we envision a world where friendships are sacred. Friendships are sacred, and to envision a world where more people treat their friendships as sacred, it means holding each other accountable when we're doing things that are cruel. That's all I have to say. Quick note before I start the 3rd letter, you're going to notice that the audio is not going to sound like I'm talking into a microphone, and that's because I forgot to hook up the microphone to the camera. I was holding the microphone the entire time, and I did steps 1, 2, and 3, but I forgot to do step 4, and I'm really sorry about that. But I recorded that letter first, and I'm really glad. Something in my brain told me, Hayes, why don't you check that recording? Why don't you make sure that everything was kosher? And I checked it, and the audio was not right, and then as I was running through my brain, realizing what could have happened, I realized I forgot to connect one piece of it. This did inspire me to make a podcast recording checklist, which why the heck didn't I have that to begin with? But now I have one, and this shouldn't happen again. And thanks for bearing with me, hazelnuts, as I figure all these things out. Okay, let's hear it. Hello, Hayes. My friends and I are currently traveling abroad on a girls' trip, and one of our friends won't stop texting her boyfriend. It feels like during all these surreal moments of our travel, she's texting him. It's gotten to the point where I feel like she's missing out on really big moments of the trip. I even feel a little jealous that she seems more invested in telling her boyfriend about what we're doing instead of just enjoying it with us. We want to share in these moments together. My other friend that we're traveling with agrees, but we don't know how to address it with her because we don't want it to seem like we're having an intervention. I understand wanting to talk to your partner while traveling. I've talked to mine just as I wake up and as I go to bed. I don't want to dismiss the importance of their relationship. How should we approach a discussion with her about being present in the moment and only talking to her boyfriends during downtime? Yours, please get off your phone. So I guess, where should I begin with this? I feel this way about like the reaction you're having about phones. I feel this way about TV and movies. I was just telling a friend recently that she was saying that one of her favorite activities to like do with friends or whatever with friends is to watch TV or throw on a movie. And that's like my least favorite thing to do with other people because I'm so easily irritated by their phone use. Like if she and I said, like if you and I were watching a movie together and you started texting, it would really bother me. But I also don't want to police other people's phone use. So I just prefer to watch movies alone or with Brian because Brian and I have kind of set ground rules about not being on our phone. Like we're never on our phone when we're watching TV together. That's just one of our like things we do in our relationship. And there are times when I'm like, I'm not going to watch TV because I'm distracted by my phone or like I want to be doing this. And I know it's going to annoy you. Of course, you could have that conversation with friends like I did with Lucy. Hey Lucy, sorry to name drop you here. You could totally have that conversation with friends. But it's like I don't like watching TV with other people for that reason. So I do understand our phones and other people's phone use is super relevant right now. And I think everybody listening probably has felt irked by that at some point. But to bring it back to your letter, the first question I have, the first thing that came to mind for me is like, is everything okay with your friend and with her boyfriend? Is everything okay with your friend? That's the initial kind of generous, empathetic read of the situation. Now, I don't know how old you guys are, whether this is your friend's first relationship, but I do think that there's a learning curve when you're away from your significant other for the first time and trying to navigate what communication should look like when we're out of our normal routine. You perhaps are bearing the brunt of some of that learning curve. But to go back to, is everything okay? Like, could there be something going on that you are not aware of? Is your friend going through a hard time and maybe talking with the boyfriend more often is reflective of that? Is something going on with the boyfriend that you might not know about? I was chatting with a friend about this advice submission earlier this morning, and she shared with me that this friend, several years ago, her partner got very sick, and she went on a bachelorette trip, and it was it was when he first got sick, and they weren't yet sure exactly what was going on. And when she went on the bachelorette trip, she said, people might have thought that I wasn't being very present because I was being very communicative with him. I had to take a nap in the middle of the day because I had just started to have these new caregiving responsibilities that I hadn't yet made sense of. And, I was still trying to live my normal life while these changes were beginning to happen. That's an extreme example, but if your friend's behavior is odd to you, the first thing you do for someone you love is just wonder if they're okay. Sometimes our initial reaction is when we notice someone's doing something annoying to us is like, what the fuck? Why aren't they being present with me? Why are they doing this annoying thing? Shouldn't they know better? When wouldn't it be, I don't want to say wouldn't it be nice because I feel like that's kind of a sarcastic thing to say, but like how much better would our relationships be if we could train our reactions, or if we could become more practiced with our reaction being, is everything okay? And that's what I first thought of here. And it's not what I always, let's be clear, this is not what I first think of always when I am annoyed by someone else's behavior, right? My initial reaction is too often, what the fuck? But we can rewire our brains, we can practice shifting that to a more empathetic, understanding first reaction. That brings us deeper into connection instead of deeper into divide. So my first thought is that you could ask her, you could inquire about if everything's okay. This is really hard to do though when you are coming from a place of being annoyed. You know what I mean? Asking someone if everything is good can come off really passive aggressive or just straight up aggressive if it's coming from a place of being annoyed. So if you are going to do that, which is what I would recommend, seeing if everything's okay before you do something else, you really have to tap into that place of love for your friend. And assuming this is a friend you travel with, I will go as far to say that you have love for this friend. That's the place you have to ask if everything's okay from. Because if you don't, I think it could end up creating more tension and problems in your relationship. And no one likes being told they're not being present, right? Most of us shut down when someone comments on our phone use. It's one of the biggest things that I get annoyed with my husband about. Because I'm super defensive about it, even when he's right. So if you're going to talk to her about it, I think you're wise to be being thoughtful about making it not seem like an intervention. And I think that if you don't think you can tap into that heart space of love for her and genuine concern versus like passive aggressive or like wanting to be right or that kind of thing, I wouldn't even inquire if she's going to be okay. If you don't feel confidently that you can tap into that place of love for her. If you can tap into that place of love and like genuine curiosity, then I think it could be, how are things going with Brian? I'm using Brian's name here as an example. How are things going with Brian? What's it been like being away? Share some of your experience with your partner and what that's felt like having this time apart and being in different countries and time zones. I'd start there and see what you learn, because if she shares with you that it's actually been hard, she's been feeling kind of anxious and a little more needy and missing them a lot, sometimes the best way for friends to help us change our behavior is through a deep, empathetic conversation that helps us learn more about ourselves and see our own blind spots, rather than someone pointing their finger at us, telling us what our blind spots are. And by having this conversation, you may provide that for your friend. Now, if you don't feel like you can have that conversation, or if you do and nothing really changes, or your friend does not have the self-awareness to reflect on her phone use, yada yada, after you have that conversation, I think that if you are really exasperated, you should be as direct as possible, because otherwise you could be seen as it's easy to fall into being passive aggressive when you are really fucking annoyed about something and you try to not be annoyed about it, or you try all these sneaky tactics to say what you need to say. Assuming you guys are close enough that you're traveling together, assuming that you have mutual respect for each other, assuming that your relationship can withstand a direct conversation, which I guess we will see, I would be super direct. And I would say something like, it's made me kind of sad when you've been texting Brian through these activities that we've been doing. Though I also understand that finding time to talk long distance is hard. Do you think we can find some balance of being present with us, no phones, and you talking to Brian? Something like that. There's a lot of finessing you could do with that sample message, but I would consider something like that. Here's what I wouldn't do. I would not say, can you just talk to your boyfriend during downtime? Your friend has agency. She's an adult. You don't get to decide when she uses her phone, when she texts her boyfriend. We do hope that your friend has self-awareness and can reflect and will start to be more intentional about when she is using her phone. But regardless, you don't get to tell her what to do. And I wouldn't suggest that you try to do that. I also wouldn't say, we've been feeling like you've been on your phone a lot. I think one of you should have this conversation in private. Maybe you ask her to go get coffee while the other friend waits and get ready. I think 2 against 1 or 3 against 1, whatever the situation is, will make her feel like she's getting ganged up on, and better to just have the conversation as if it's just the 2 of you. And if she says, has everybody been talking about this? I think it's fine to have a white lie there. You can say, no one's talking about it like that. I've noticed it. I think that's a fine white lie. Do I believe that? Yeah. I think that's a fine white lie, because it's going to get the same point across. Telling her that everybody's talking about it, I don't think that will have more, I guess it depends on the friend. I don't think that'll make it more likely for her to change her behavior. I think she'll actually be more likely to hear you if she doesn't feel attacked and like everybody's been gossiping about her. Another thought, and this is kind of a general word of advice about how to talk to friends about uncomfortable things. As a chronic overthinker and person who obsesses about how to say things, the best way to say something that you're nervous about, you think might be awkward, is to keep it casual. And I think we keep it casual by keeping the tone aligned with how we normally speak. That's why whenever I give a script in a video, I make sure to say, adapt this so that it sounds like you. Adapt this so that it's natural for your relationship. Because nothing will make something sound kind of scarier and more intense than you suddenly speaking to your friend in a way that you've never spoken before. Unless the way you typically speak is aggressive and mean and indirect or whatever, and you're trying to be different. Then they might start to notice shifts. But you want to kind of keep it in tone with who you are and how you naturally sound. If you don't want to go the approach of like going to coffee privately and pulling her aside. Maybe actually I would suggest you do this first. Let's say you're in the museum, okay? You're in the museum and she's like, oh my God, I want to FaceTime Brian to like show him this statue. In the moment, you could say, can you try him after? I want to experience this with you. Something like that. And then it sort of pulls her out. It pulls her out of calling Brian and instead puts her back in the moment. It doesn't sound aggressive. It doesn't sound like you've been kind of obsessing and thinking over it and judging her. It's just like right now, which could actually be a good way to start. So maybe I'd start with that. There's a couple other things though that I want to say to you, the letter writer, about what you said. You mentioned that you feel like she's missing out on all these surreal moments of your trip. But I want to point out that what feels surreal for you might not feel surreal for her. Or what feels life-changing and like you're looking at something with awe, your friend might not have that same range of feeling. She might not have that same ability to be so in the moment and present. And traveling with people, we start to notice that, we start to notice those stark contrasts. Whereas if you're just in your hometown or you're at school or you're in your job in your city, it's a little easier to miss that, to miss somebody's sort of not shallowness, but like inability to be in the moment. Travel is the time to be in the moment, to experience awe and gratitude. And you might just be noticing that this friend is not as practiced at that as you are. And that might make you feel disappointed. That might make you feel sad. That might make you feel confused. But you can't force someone to feel things the way you feel. So I want to just throw that out to you. I also thought it was interesting that the fact that you yourself are in a relationship does change the dynamic here. And I want to point out that you mentioned that you've just been talking to your partner in the morning at night, and that's been fine. And to me, that's a sign that you are super independent. You and your partner have really great communication. Your friend, though, the friend you're traveling with, might not be as confident as you are. The dynamics of their relationship might be different than yours. They seem to be different than yours. And you might not want to do things that way, but your friend does. And it doesn't necessarily mean that the way your friend does things is bad. Right now, it is impacting your trip. And we already talked about some ways that you could possibly communicate that. But I also want you to consider that like, oh, I'm learning now that my friend is like this in her relationship. And it's a new side of my friend that I'm seeing. And I'm going to try to accept what I can about her. And I'm also going to try, and in accepting what I can about this, I'm going to try to let some things bounce off my back. Because as friends get in relationships, a new side of them develops. Or it's not entirely new. Or maybe it's like a new side of them comes to the surface. And as a friend, you can help mold that and shape that and witness it. And this might be how your friend shows up in relationships. And, having that conversation about how things have been going, maybe you'll be able to give some insight. Maybe you'll be able to model a little bit how you've gotten to the place in your relationship where you can just talk in the morning at night and that feels good. But I wonder if saying to yourself, hey, my relationship is different than hers and that's okay. I'm glad I'm not in that relationship. I'm so grateful actually that my relationship is this way. Rooting yourself maybe in gratitude for like the way your relationship functions might help you feel less annoyed at her. I'm also really curious about the jealous thing, how you said that her talking to her boyfriend throughout all the activities makes you feel a little jealous. I think that's really interesting and super honest. I never thought about this consciously. My friend actually said that to me when I was sharing this with her. But like, what is it? What is it that does evoke some sense of like jealousy or frustration when someone is on their phone around us? I want to grab what my friend said so I can read it to you. She said, what is it about this being, people being on their phones, that's so triggering for us? What is it about this that's so triggering for us? Is it that we're secretly afraid we are boring and unloved and this is proof? Ooh. Gosh, I love having such sensitive, smart friends. Right, is like the fact that she's on her phone proving to you something about yourself. Because that's what we do. When we have insecurities all day long, we're looking for proof that what we believe about ourselves is true. And unless we're really super conscious about rejecting that and replacing those thoughts and practicing, I don't know, they'll sort of, that proof will find us. They'll like sneak through the wind and like seep into our skin. And over time, I think it builds up insecurity and self-doubt and all those things that we try to tackle here together in our Hello Haze letters. So I want to just offer to you that the reason that she is texting her boyfriend throughout your trip has nothing to do with how grateful she is to be there with you. I would argue, and I'd be willing to bet a lot, that it has everything to do with how she feels about herself and her relationship. I don't think it is consciously my friend here is boring and it isn't good enough for me just to be present with them. I don't think it's that at all. Not that that takes away from the feeling you have, but I just want to explicitly state that, since you were so generous to say that you feel jealous. To wrap this one up, I'd also like to use this as an opportunity to discuss phone etiquette from like the other side of things. I do think that more people, myself included, more of us should just be aware of how we're using our phones with others. I always notice when someone else leaves their phone like on the table faced up. I always notice when I'm with someone and they're texting the whole time. What makes it better though is when someone acknowledges it. Like if I'm out to lunch with one person and they need to do something on their phone, I so appreciate when they say, "Give me 1 minute. I'm sorry. I need to handle this one thing. I don't want to multitask and I want to give you my attention. Give me 1 second." That never bothers me. What does bother me is if I'm talking and someone's looking at their phone and they're like, yeah, that would drive me crazy. I'd rather you just say it or excuse yourself for a moment. I think that phones, when they're like on the table or when you're with someone, should be face down or away, because the reality is that we all are distracted by notifications. And traveling is tricky. Traveling is tricky because it's not like you're just with someone for a lunch and you can put your phone away for the 2-hour lunch or whatever. You're with them like pretty much 24/7. And I don't think it's totally fair to say, okay, if we're traveling together, you should only be on your phone in the morning and at night. But I think that if you are going to travel with friends, that could be like a good thing to talk about beforehand. Like if anyone has any major pet peeves, and then even the people with pet peeves, you're going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to be flexible because you're with someone all day long. And it isn't totally reasonable to ask them to only be on their phone in the morning and at night. And I think that's all I got for you. Please get off your phone. I hope that helped.